Your suffering begins the moment you beg life to give you what your judgment has not earned. If you are ready to stop chasing approval and start governing your mind with reason, stay here and join this work by subscribing, because this channel exists for people who want discipline, clarity, and self-respect, not noise. We will speak plainly about what is in your control, what is not, and how silence can protect your dignity when emotion tries to rule you. You will see how chasing, begging, and explaining weaken the soul, and how daily self-command restores it. This is not comfort for a restless mind. This is training for a serious one. If you are tired of living by reaction and ready to live by choice, keep watching. What follows will ask you to face yourself honestly and decide whether you will keep surrendering your peace to externals each day. Number 1. Refuse to chase what lies beyond your control. Stop giving your mind to what you cannot command. Stop pouring your energy into people who will not be moved by your pleading. Stop running after outcomes that belong to fortune and not to your will. The moment you begin to chase what is outside your control, you hand over your peace to things that do not belong to you. You become restless because you have mistaken desire for power. You become weak because you keep asking the world to obey your wishes. That is not freedom. That is dependence. Look at your own life, honestly. How much of your day is spent trying to force a result? You want the message answered. You want the approval given. You want the relationship to become what you imagined. You want the work to be praised. You want the body to change faster. You want the person to understand. You want the past to be different. And because none of this can be fully commanded by your hand, you suffer. Not because life is cruel by nature, but because your judgment is confused. You have placed your good in what can be taken from you. That is why your mind trembles. That is why one delay can ruin your day. That is why one silence can wound your pride. That is why one rejection can make you feel small. The cure is not to stop caring. The cure is to care correctly. You must learn the difference between what is up to you and what is not. Your judgments are up to you. Your choices are up to you. Your conduct is up to you. Your effort is up to you. Your honesty is up to you. But the response of another person is not up to you. The timing of events is not up to you. The opinion of the crowd is not up to you. The final outcome is not up to you. When you confuse these things, you become a servant to chance. When you separate them with discipline, you become steady. This is where the undisciplined mind rebels. It says, "But I must try harder. I must explain more. I must convince them. I must push until the result appears." No, you must act with reason and then let go of what belongs to fate. There is a difference between sincere effort and desperate chasing. Sincere effort is calm. It does what is right and accepts what follows. Desperate chasing is noisy. It demands, it clings, it fears. It cannot stand still because stillness would force it to admit that it does not control life. And that is the truth many people avoid. You do not need to beg for what is not yours to command. Begging is what a person does when he has already given away his dignity. A wise person does not grovel before uncertainty. He does not measure his worth by whether another approves. He does not kneel before the shifting moods of other minds. He knows that virtue is the only good. He knows that if he acts with justice, courage, discipline, and wisdom, he has already done the one thing that truly matters. Everything else is secondary. Everything else is an addition. Everything else may come or not come. His character remains his own. When you wake each morning, you should not ask what will be given to you. Ask instead what kind of person you will be while things are being given or withheld. That is the first correction. Before you reach for your phone, before you seek reassurance, before you ask whether they replied, before you hurry toward the day in fear of missing something, ask yourself a harder question. What is required of me today as a rational human being? That question clears away vanity. It removes panic. It returns you to duty. Practice this from the first moment of the day. Sit still before the noise begins. Name what is in your power. Name what is not in your power. Say it plainly. My opinions are in my power. My choices are in my power. My refusal to lie is in my power. My patience is in my power. The actions of others are not in my power. Their praise is not in my power. Their silence is not in my power. The weather of the day is not in my power. The result is not in my power. Then decide to work only where your power actually lives. This simple separation will save you more suffering than any comfort ever could. A man who chases control over externals is always late to his own life. He is forever reacting. He receives a text and his mood rises or falls. He hears criticism and his mind collapses. He sees someone he wants and he forgets himself. He is ruled by appetite and fear. He is not living by reason. He is being dragged by impulse. And what is impulse but a wild movement of the soul that has not been examined? You must not obey every feeling simply because it is strong. Strength without judgment is only noise. When you feel the urge to chase, stop, and delay, do not answer immediately. Do not move immediately. Do not plead immediately. Pause long enough to ask whether your action belongs to virtue or to fear. Ask whether you are about to preserve your dignity or abandon it. Ask whether you are about to serve your purpose or serve your craving. The pause is small, but its power is large. In that small gap between feeling and action, your freedom lives. Most people never enter that gap. They are carried by the first movement of the mind, and then wonder why their life feels scattered. You must also train yourself to endure the absence of what you desire. This is not punishment, this is training. A person who cannot tolerate not getting what he wants is easy to control. He can be manipulated by delay. He can be bought with attention. He can be silenced with the threat of loss. Do not let that be you. Practice being without the thing you think will complete you. Practice letting the unanswered message remain unanswered without chasing it. Practice letting the approval remain unspoken without collapsing. Practice letting your desire stand in front of you without obeying it. The more you train this, the less the world can govern your mood. There is a severe beauty in this discipline. It teaches you that you do not need every door to open. You do not need every person to understand. You do not need every plan to succeed. You need only to remain just in action and clear in judgment. If a door opens, walk through it with reason. If it closes, accept it with dignity. If someone respects you, receive it without arrogance. If someone rejects you, do not pursue your self-respect into their hands. Keep it within yourself where it belongs. Chasing often begins in the mind, long before it appears in action. A person rehearses what he will say. He imagines how he can impress. He constructs arguments to force a feeling from someone else. He spends hours in inward negotiation with what was never his to negotiate. This is wasted life. No amount of explanation can make another soul obey your need. No amount of pursuit can turn fate into a servant. No amount of begging can make what is external become secure. Once you understand this, you become quieter, not from weakness but from clarity. This silence is not emptiness, it is control. It is the refusal to spend breath on what cannot be improved by noise. It is the decision to keep your mind on the one place where moral action is possible. A person who has learned this can sit in uncertainty without breaking. He can wait without humiliation. He can be misunderstood without panic. He can lose an opportunity without losing himself. That is power, real power. Not the power to command others, but the power to remain ruled by reason when life does not submit. You will be tested here. A delay will tempt you. A slight will tempt you. A longing will tempt you. A fear of being forgotten will tempt you. When that happens, do not dramatize it. Do not tell yourself stories that make the feeling bigger than it is. Say instead, "This is only an impression. It is not a command. It asks for my attention, but it does not deserve my obedience." Then return to the task before you. That is how the soul becomes trained, not through grand speeches, but through repeated refusals. Begin to measure your day by virtue rather than outcome. Did you act with fairness? Did you speak truth? Did you keep self-command? Did you resist needless craving? Did you do what was yours to do and leave the rest alone? These are the proper questions. Not did they reply, not did they choose you, not did the world reward you on time. Those questions are enslaving because they move your center outside yourself. And a center outside yourself can never be stable. There will be moments when you are tempted to force a result because you are afraid that letting go means not caring. That is a false fear. Letting go of control over externals does not make you passive. It makes you precise. It means you act without attachment to reward. You speak because truth requires it, and then you stop. You work because duty requires it, and then you stop. You love because virtue requires it, and then you stop demanding that love be returned in the exact form you imagined. This is the mature soul. It gives what is right, and does not become bankrupt when the world answers imperfectly. Consider how much of your suffering is caused not by events, but by your resistance to their nature. You want the world to be under obligation to your preference, but the world owes you no such thing. Other people owe you no such thing. Even your own body will not always obey your wishes. Time will continue regardless of your protest. Fortune will turn, seasons will change, people will leave, plans will fail, bodies will weaken. This is not tragedy, this is the condition of mortal life. Wisdom begins when you stop arguing with the condition of life and start governing your judgment within it. So when you feel yourself beginning to chase, remember this: nothing outside your choice can be made secure by panic. Panic is not power. Pursuit is not dignity. Begging is not love. Explanation is not always wisdom. Sometimes the wiser act is to hold your tongue and keep your standards. Sometimes the stronger act is to walk away without resentment. Sometimes the freest act is to accept that what was not meant for your virtue was never truly yours. Do not confuse surrender to fate with surrender of effort. Work, improve, practice, build, prepare, but do these things without attaching your soul to the result. Let your labor be clean, let your intentions be upright, let your mind remain free enough to accept what comes. This is not coldness, this is strength under command. The sailor cannot command the sea, but he can command the sail. The athlete cannot command the crowd, but he can command his training. You cannot command every result, but you can command your judgment and your conduct. Tonight, examine yourself with honesty. Where did you chase? Where did you beg? Where did you explain too much because you feared being misunderstood? Where did you surrender your peace to something outside your control? Do not hide from the answer. The soul heals when it is seen clearly. Write it down if needed. Name the moments without excuse. Then decide how you will act differently tomorrow. The man who does this daily is not drifting toward wisdom. He is practicing it. And when tomorrow comes, do not wait for a perfect mood. Begin with discipline. Begin with the decision not to chase what is beyond your control. Begin by reclaiming your attention. Begin by refusing to let desire become a master. Begin by accepting that your worth does not rise or fall with external approval. Begin by acting with reason and letting the rest belong to life itself. This is the path of strength. This is the path of peace. This is the path that returns you to yourself. You have wasted enough time running after what cannot be held. Return now to what is truly yours. Your judgment, your choice, your conduct, your integrity. Guard these and you will no longer be poor in spirit, even if fortune is stingy. Guard these and you will no longer be shaken by silence. Guard these and you will no longer need the world to validate your existence. You will stand in your own mind with steadiness. You will know that you did not beg life to honor you. You honored life by meeting it with reason. Number 2. Guard your dignity by speaking only when necessary. Words have exposed more weakness than silence ever will. A person speaks too quickly because he fears being unseen. He explains too much because he fears rejection. He argues endlessly because he cannot tolerate being misunderstood. He fills every moment with noise because he has never learned how to sit firmly inside his own judgment. This is not strength. This is dependence disguised as expression. Watch yourself carefully during ordinary moments. Someone questions your decision, and immediately you begin defending yourself before they even finish speaking. Someone grows distant, and you rush to explain your intentions. Someone misunderstands you, and your mind burns with the need to correct every detail. You call this communication, but often it is only fear searching for relief. You are not speaking because reason requires it. You are speaking because your emotions are demanding protection. The disciplined mind does not speak to escape discomfort. It speaks when speech serves truth, justice, or necessity. Nothing more. A person governed by reason understands that many conversations are attempts to gain control over another person's opinion. But another person's opinion does not belong to you. You cannot force understanding into another mind. You cannot force respect through endless explanation. You cannot force wisdom into someone committed to confusion. The more desperately you try, the more you surrender your composure. Your dignity weakens each time you abandon calm judgment to chase reassurance through words. This is why silence frightens so many people. Silence removes the illusion of control. When you stop speaking, you can no longer manipulate the moment through emotional urgency. You are left alone with reality. Either your character stands on its own or it does not. Many people discover in silence that they have built their lives around the reactions of others. They speak not because truth requires it, but because approval has become a hidden addiction. You must learn to recognize the difference between necessary speech and emotional leakage. Necessary speech is measured. It serves a purpose. It remains steady even under pressure. Emotional leakage is restless. It overshares. It repeats itself. It seeks validation. It reveals every wound to anyone willing to listen. A disciplined person guards the entrance to his mouth because he understands that every uncontrolled word trains the mind toward weakness. This does not mean becoming cold or withdrawn. Stoic discipline is not the rejection of human connection. It is the rejection of emotional slavery. You can speak with warmth and still remain governed by reason. You can care deeply and still refuse to lose yourself in compulsive explanation. Silence is not the absence of feeling. It is the refusal to let feelings command your actions without examination. Before you speak, ask yourself one hard question. Am I speaking to serve virtue or to protect my ego? That question alone can change the course of your life. Many arguments disappear under honest examination. Many explanations suddenly become unnecessary. Many emotional reactions lose their force once exposed to reason. The mind often creates urgency where none exists. It tells you that if you do not answer immediately, you will lose control of the situation. But control over external reactions was never yours to begin with. A person insults you. Instantly your mind prepares a defense. It searches for sharper words. It wants victory. But pause for a moment and examine what is actually happening. Another person has formed a judgment. That judgment belongs to them. Your response belongs to you. Their insult cannot damage your character unless you surrender your reason in return. If you answer anger with anger, you have handed your inner state to another person's ignorance. This is why silence often carries greater strength than retaliation. Not because silence always wins outwardly, but because silence preserves inward order. Many people ruin their peace trying to correct every false opinion spoken about them. They spend years explaining themselves to people who already decided not to understand. They chase clarity from minds committed to distortion. This is wasted life. You do not need universal agreement to live honorably. You do not need everyone to see your intentions correctly. Your responsibility is not to manage every perception. Your responsibility is to remain just, truthful, disciplined, and reasonable, regardless of perception. The undisciplined person treats every misunderstanding like an emergency. The disciplined person understands that human beings often judge poorly because they themselves are governed by fear, pride, desire, or confusion. Why become disturbed by what flawed minds conclude in moments of ignorance? If you know your actions were governed by virtue, then remain steady. If your actions were wrong, then correct them quietly without drama. In either case, endless explanation adds little value. Practice speaking less than your impulse demands. This is a difficult exercise because the ego constantly seeks expression. During conversations, notice how often you interrupt. Notice how often you speak simply to fill silence. Notice how often you repeat yourself, hoping for agreement. Notice how often you reveal private struggles to gain sympathy rather than wisdom. None of this strengthens the soul. The soul strengthens when speech becomes deliberate instead of automatic. Begin training yourself in restraint through small daily disciplines. When someone provokes you, do not answer immediately. Let the first emotional reaction pass before choosing your words. When you receive criticism, do not rush to defend yourself. Listen fully. Separate useful truth from emotional noise. When you feel the urge to explain your choices to someone who has not earned access to your inner life, remain silent and observe the discomfort without obeying it. This discomfort is part of your training. It reveals how dependent you have become on external validation. There is another danger in excessive speech. Every unnecessary word pulls attention away from self-examination. A person who constantly talks about virtue rarely practices it deeply. A person who constantly announces intentions often lacks disciplined action. Noise creates the illusion of progress while leaving the character unchanged. This is why calm action carries more weight than endless declarations. The disciplined person lets conduct speak where words are insufficient. Look honestly at how much suffering has entered your life through uncontrolled speech. Harsh words spoken during anger, confessions given to people who later used them against you, arguments that continued long after reason disappeared, attempts to force understanding where humility would have served better. Every one of these moments began with failure to govern the tongue. The mouth reveals the condition of the mind. A restless tongue often exposes a restless soul. Silence trains perception. When you stop rushing to speak, you begin noticing things previously hidden by your own noise. You observe the motives behind people's words. You notice your own emotional reactions more clearly. You recognize how often conversations are driven by vanity, fear, insecurity, or competition. This awareness strengthens judgment because the mind becomes less entangled in immediate reaction. Do not mistake constant expression for honesty. Some people reveal every emotion the moment it appears and call this authenticity, but immediate expression is often nothing more than undisciplined impulse. Real honesty requires examination. Before speaking, ask whether your words are true, necessary, and beneficial to the situation. If they fail these standards, silence is usually the wiser path. The person who cannot remain silent becomes easy to manipulate. Others quickly learn what provokes him because he reveals every reaction openly. He exposes every insecurity through uncontrolled speech. But the disciplined person remains difficult to disturb because he does not hand his inner state to every passing emotion. His silence creates space between impression and response. In that space, reason has time to govern. This discipline becomes especially important during conflict. When emotions rise, most people abandon reason completely. They say things designed to wound rather than clarify. They speak to punish rather than understand. Afterwards, regret arrives, but the damage remains. A Stoic mind refuses this surrender. It understands that temporary anger is never permission for permanent foolishness. Better to remain silent for a moment than to spend years repairing words spoken without discipline. Each evening, examine your speech with the same seriousness you examine your actions. Ask yourself where your words lacked restraint. Ask where you spoke from vanity instead of wisdom. Ask where silence would have preserved greater dignity. Do not condemn yourself for these failures. Study them carefully. The goal is not self-hatred but correction. Every day provides another opportunity to govern yourself more skillfully. There will be moments when silence feels unbearable because your pride demands defense. In those moments, remember this clearly: your worth does not increase because someone finally agrees with you. Your character does not improve because every accusation is corrected. Your peace cannot depend on universal understanding because human judgment is unstable by nature. Build your life on something steadier than opinion. Learn also to speak plainly when speech truly becomes necessary. Stoic silence is not cowardice. When justice requires words, speak directly without cruelty. When truth requires defense, do not hide behind passivity. When another person genuinely seeks understanding, answer with patience and clarity. The disciplined mind does not avoid speech entirely. It simply refuses wasteful speech driven by ego, fear, or emotional excess. There is strength in becoming difficult to provoke. There is freedom in no longer needing the final word. There is dignity in allowing another person's misunderstanding to exist without turning your inner life into chaos. This freedom cannot be purchased. It must be trained through repeated acts of self-command. You will notice something important as this discipline deepens. Your relationships become clearer. Some people were only attached to your reactions. Some conversations existed only to feed emotional conflict. Some individuals lose interest once they realize they can no longer pull you into endless explanation and defensiveness. Let them go peacefully. A quieter mind sees more truth about people because it is no longer distracted by the need to constantly respond. Guarding your speech also protects your attention. Attention is one of the few things truly belonging to you. Every unnecessary argument steals it. Every emotional defense weakens it. Every attempt to control another person's opinion drains it. A wise person spends attention carefully because life itself is short. Why waste hours explaining yourself to minds unwilling to listen when those same hours could strengthen your character through useful action? Train yourself to become comfortable with being misunderstood. This is one of the hardest disciplines because the ego craves recognition. But maturity begins when you realize that clarity of conscience matters more than clarity of reputation. If your actions remain honorable, then temporary misunderstanding cannot truly harm you. Time reveals character more reliably than argument ever will. When you wake tomorrow, carry this discipline into ordinary moments. Speak slowly. Answer carefully. Refuse unnecessary defense. Observe emotional urgency before obeying it. Let silence interrupt impulse. Let reason inspect every reaction before words leave your mouth. This is not weakness. This is governance of the self. A person who cannot govern speech cannot govern life. The tongue follows the condition of the mind. If the mind remains scattered, speech becomes scattered. If the mind remains disciplined, speech becomes disciplined. Therefore, guard your speech not merely to appear composed, but to strengthen the ruling center within yourself. The world is already filled with noise from people desperate to prove themselves. Do not join them. Let your conduct carry your principles. Let your restraint reveal your discipline. Let your silence expose the strength of a mind no longer enslaved to reaction. When words become necessary, use them with precision and integrity. When they are unnecessary, remain still without shame. That is dignity. That is self-command. That is freedom no crowd can give and no crowd can take away. Number 3. Accept rejection without begging for another's approval. Rejection only destroys the person who has already decided that another human being holds the authority to define his worth. That is the hidden wound beneath your suffering, not the rejection itself, not the silence, not the refusal. The deeper wound is that you built your peace upon another person's acceptance and then acted surprised when your peace collapsed the moment they withdrew it. You placed your dignity into hands that were never stable enough to carry it. Look carefully at what happens inside you when someone turns away. Your thoughts immediately begin searching for explanations. You replay conversations. You examine every detail. You wonder what you lacked. You begin negotiating with memory itself, hoping to find some sentence or action that could have secured a different outcome. Then comes the deeper humiliation. You start trying to regain approval. You become more available, more agreeable, more anxious to be understood. You abandon calm judgment and call it love. You abandon self-respect and call it effort. But this is not devotion. This is fear of standing alone with yourself. The undisciplined mind believes rejection removes value from the person rejected. Stoic reason rejects this completely. Another person's preference is not a measure of your character. Another person's emotional response is not a final judgment upon your worth. Human beings choose according to countless unstable conditions. Desire changes, opinions change, moods change, circumstances change. Why would you tie your inner condition to something so unreliable? You suffer because you confuse attachment with necessity. You convince yourself that without this person's approval, you cannot remain whole. But examine this honestly. Before they arrived, you already possessed the capacity for reason, virtue, and self-command. Their presence did not create your worth, and their absence cannot remove it. The problem is not rejection itself. The problem is your habit of searching outside yourself for confirmation that should have been built internally through disciplined character. There is a severe form of slavery hidden inside the need to be chosen. A person becomes willing to betray his own standards merely to avoid abandonment. He tolerates disrespect because he fears loneliness. He hides his convictions because he fears disapproval. He performs constantly hoping to secure affection through pleasing behavior. Eventually, he no longer knows where his real character ends and his performance begins. This is what happens when approval becomes more important than virtue. You must understand something clearly. No human being can grant you inner stability. Stability belongs only to the person who governs himself according to reason. If your peace depends on another person's affection, then your peace is permanently vulnerable. The Stoic path demands something harder, but far more reliable. Build a character capable of standing upright even when misunderstood, unwanted, or dismissed. That is freedom. Anything weaker leaves your emotional life at the mercy of external events. When rejection arrives, the first discipline is to separate fact from judgment. The fact is simple. Someone declined your presence, your request, your affection, or your companionship. Everything after that is interpretation. I am unworthy. I am not enough. I will always be abandoned. These are not facts. These are conclusions produced by an undisciplined mind. You accept these judgments too quickly because you have never trained yourself to examine your thoughts before obeying them. The disciplined mind pauses before granting authority to emotional impressions. It asks whether the judgment is rational. It asks whether virtue has actually been harmed. It asks whether rejection truly damages honesty, courage, discipline, or wisdom. And the answer is no. Rejection may wound pride. It may disappoint desire. It may frustrate expectation. But none of these are the highest good. The highest good remains the condition of your character. This is why begging for approval destroys dignity. The moment you begin pleading for acceptance, you announce to yourself that another person's validation is worth more than your own self-command. You begin abandoning reason in exchange for emotional relief. You over-explain. You tolerate humiliation. You chase after clarity from someone unwilling to give it. Each act deepens dependence because it teaches the mind that peace can only return once approval is restored. A disciplined person refuses this inner collapse, not because he feels no disappointment, but because he understands that emotional pain is not permission to abandon principles. He remains respectful without becoming desperate. He remains honest without surrendering composure. He accepts reality instead of attempting to force affection through persistence. This restraint protects the soul from degrading itself in moments of emotional weakness. Notice how often rejection exposes your hidden vanity. You thought your kindness guaranteed acceptance. You thought your effort guaranteed loyalty. You thought your intentions guaranteed appreciation. But life does not operate according to personal entitlement. You are responsible for your conduct, not for controlling outcomes. Once you understand this, you stop treating rejection like an injustice against your identity. You begin seeing it simply as part of human existence. Morning discipline becomes essential here because rejection often attacks the mind before the day even begins. You wake already thinking about who ignored you, who withdrew, who disappointed you. Before your feet touch the floor, your attention has already been handed away. Break this habit immediately. Begin the day by returning your focus to what belongs to you. Your judgments belong to you. Your actions belong to you. Your ability to meet difficulty with dignity belongs to you. Another person's approval does not belong to you and never did. Sit quietly each morning and prepare yourself deliberately. Remind yourself that human beings act according to their own understanding, desires, fears, and limitations. Some will welcome you, some will leave you, some will misunderstand you completely. None of this determines whether you can still act with integrity today. This preparation prevents emotional shock because you stop demanding permanence from temporary things. There is another truth you avoid because it is uncomfortable. Sometimes rejection reveals not your inadequacy, but another person's inability to recognize virtue. A mind governed by vanity often rejects discipline. A person addicted to chaos often withdraws from steadiness. A shallow character may dislike honesty because honesty exposes weakness. Why then would you beg to remain where reason is unwelcome? Why would you chase acceptance from people whose values conflict with the very qualities you should be strengthening? This does not mean becoming arrogant or bitter. Stoicism does not teach contempt for others. It teaches clarity about human limitation. You too possess flaws. You too sometimes judge poorly. This is why rejection should be met neither with self-hatred nor resentment. Accept the event calmly. Learn what reason can learn from it. Correct genuine faults where necessary. Then continue forward without dragging humiliation behind you like a chain. Your suffering intensifies when you make one person the center of your emotional world. The mind becomes consumed by imagined futures, lost opportunities, and endless analysis. You stop living in the present because your thoughts remain trapped inside another person's decision. Days pass while you mentally argue with reality itself. This is a misuse of life. Time is too limited for endless emotional negotiation with events already decided. Instead, return attention to conduct. Train your body. Strengthen your discipline. Fulfill responsibilities. Study your weaknesses honestly. Serve others where possible. Build habits worthy of respect, regardless of who notices. The soul recovers stability through purposeful action, not through obsessive rumination. A person rebuilding himself through virtue no longer appears desperate because his identity is no longer dependent upon external attachment. You must also stop using rejection as evidence that you should abandon yourself. Many people become imitators after emotional disappointment. They change their speech, their appearance, their values, and their boundaries, hoping future approval will finally arrive. But imitation without conviction weakens character further. A Stoic does not shape himself according to every passing opinion. He shapes himself according to reason and moral purpose. There will be moments when loneliness follows rejection. Do not rush to escape it. Solitude reveals truths. Distraction keeps hidden. In silence, you begin noticing how much of your life revolved around external reassurance. You discover how uncomfortable you feel when no one is affirming your value. Good. This discomfort shows exactly where discipline is needed. Remain with it long enough to understand it instead of immediately seeking another source of validation. Practice voluntary restraint during these periods. Resist checking constantly for messages. Resist inventing excuses to regain contact. Resist creating dramatic stories about your suffering simply to attract sympathy. Observe these impulses without obeying them. Each refusal strengthens self-command. Each moment of restraint teaches the mind that emotional discomfort can be endured without surrendering dignity. Evening examination is equally important. At the end of each day, review your reactions honestly. Did rejection make you dishonest? Did it make you neglect responsibilities? Did it make you resentful? Did it make you abandon self-respect through desperate behavior? Examine these failures calmly without excuse. The goal is correction, not self-punishment. A person grows wiser by studying his errors directly instead of hiding from them. You should also question the fantasy hidden inside your craving for approval. You imagine that once accepted you will finally feel secure, but external approval rarely produces lasting peace because the mind immediately fears losing it again. This creates endless dependence. First you suffer seeking acceptance, then you suffer protecting it. A person governed this way never rests because his emotional stability depends entirely on forces outside his command. Real peace emerges differently. It appears when your conscience no longer accuses you of betraying your principles. It appears when your conduct remains aligned with reason regardless of external reaction. It appears when you stop bargaining away dignity for temporary reassurance. This peace is quieter than excitement but far more stable. Do not waste your life trying to become universally desired. That ambition corrupts character because it demands constant adaptation to other people's expectations. Instead, become trustworthy in your conduct. Become disciplined in your habits. Become measured in speech. Become reliable in action. Let virtue shape you more deeply than approval ever could. When someone rejects you, let the event train you rather than diminish you. Use it to strengthen detachment from external validation. Use it to expose emotional dependence previously hidden from view. Use it to practice remaining steady under disappointment. Every difficult event can either weaken the soul through resentment or strengthen it through disciplined interpretation. You are not entitled to acceptance from every person you admire. You are entitled only to your own moral effort. Once you fully understand this, you stop begging, you stop chasing, you stop collapsing whenever another human being changes direction. You begin carrying yourself with greater calm because your center of gravity has returned inward where it belongs. One day you will look back and realize that many of the people whose approval once consumed your mind were never capable of giving you the peace you were seeking. That peace had to be built through self-governance all along, not through admiration, not through romantic attachment, not through constant reassurance, through discipline, through clarity, through repeated acts of inner honesty. Stand up now with that understanding. Let rejection instruct you without humiliating you. Let disappointment refine your judgment without poisoning your spirit. Let solitude strengthen your relationship with your own conscience. And above all, never kneel before another person's approval as if it were the source of your worth. Your worth is measured by the condition of your character and the discipline with which you govern your own mind. Everything else changes with circumstance. Character remains. Number 4. Examine your judgments before you answer any insult. An insult is never the real danger. Your reaction to it is. That is where your character is revealed without disguise, not in calm moments, not in comfort, but in the instant your pride feels struck and your mind rushes to defend itself. In that brief moment, you either govern your judgment or you surrender it. Most people surrender without noticing. They believe they are responding to words when in truth they are obeying impulse. You must understand what is actually happening when someone insults you. You hear a statement. The mind instantly produces a judgment about that statement. Then another judgment follows about what that statement means about you. Then emotion rises based on that interpretation. The insult itself is not inside you, it is outside you. What disturbs you is not the event but the interpretation you accept without examination. This is where most suffering begins, not in reality but in unexamined thought. The disciplined mind refuses to accept every impression at face value. It pauses before agreement. It asks whether the judgment formed in response to the insult is accurate or distorted. It separates what was said from what it assumes about identity. It refuses to let a single sentence define the whole of a person's worth. This pause is not weakness. It is mastery over reaction. When insult arrives, the undisciplined mind immediately seeks retaliation. It wants to restore status. It wants to correct perception. It wants to wound back in equal measure. But this impulse is not reason. It is wounded pride demanding relief. If you act from that place, you are not defending truth. You are defending ego. And ego is not worth defending because it is unstable by nature. It changes with every opinion it encounters. Begin to observe how quickly you turn language into identity. Someone calls you ignorant, and suddenly you feel reduced. Someone questions your ability, and suddenly you feel smaller. Someone mocks your choices, and suddenly you feel attacked at your core. But none of these words have entered the substance of your character. They have only passed through your perception. The damage is created internally when you agree with an unexamined judgment. This is why examination must come before response. Not after, not during, before. When insult reaches you, treat it as raw material, not truth. Ask yourself what exactly was said. Then ask what evidence supports or contradicts it. Then ask whether your emotional reaction is proportional to the actual content or inflated by pride. Most insults lose their force when examined calmly because they rely on immediate reaction to gain power. There is another discipline required here. You must learn to distinguish between truth and provocation. Sometimes criticism contains useful information. The careless mind rejects everything as insult and loses the chance to improve. A disciplined mind extracts whatever is useful and discards emotional noise. If there is truth in the statement, use it without shame. If there is falsehood, reject it without disturbance. But in neither case should your inner stability depend on emotional retaliation. Many people believe that responding quickly proves strength. In reality, it often reveals lack of control. A person who cannot pause before reacting is governed by impulse rather than reason. Stoic strength is not measured by speed of reaction, but by quality of judgment. The ability to remain steady when provoked is a higher form of strength than the ability to respond aggressively. When insult strikes, imagine holding it in your mind for a moment without reaction. Do not suppress it. Do not amplify it. Simply observe it. Ask what part of you is actually affected. Is your character harmed, or is your image threatened? Is your virtue weakened, or is your pride disturbed? Virtue cannot be taken by words. Only your opinion about words can disturb you. This distinction is everything. Your suffering increases when you believe that every insult requires correction. You begin living as if every misunderstanding must be repaired immediately, but life does not require constant defense. Much of what people say arises from their own confusion, fatigue, insecurity, or ignorance. Why should your peace depend on correcting every unstable opinion that passes through another mind? Train yourself to delay judgment. This is not avoidance, it is clarity. When insult appears, do not immediately assign meaning. Let the mind settle, then evaluate. In that space between impression and response, reason regains authority. Without that space, you are simply repeating instinct. You will notice something important when you practice this. Many insults lose emotional charge the moment you stop feeding them with attention. They are sustained only by reaction. Remove reaction and they shrink. What once felt heavy becomes insignificant, not because the words changed, but because your interpretation changed. You must also confront the deeper root of insult sensitivity. It is attachment to external image. You want to be seen a certain way, you want approval to remain intact. You want reputation to stay untouched, so when someone disturbs that image you feel threatened. But reputation is not fully yours to control. It belongs partly to the perception of others, which is unstable and unpredictable. If you tie dignity to reputation, you will constantly suffer. True dignity belongs to conduct, not perception. Each morning you should prepare your mind for misunderstanding, not to become cynical, but to become steady. Remind yourself that people will interpret actions through their own limited understanding. Some will misread you, some will exaggerate, some will criticize without knowledge. This is not an exception to life, it is part of it. When you accept this in advance, insults lose their ability to destabilize you. Practice also the habit of reviewing your judgments before accepting them as truth. Throughout the day, impressions will appear rapidly. Someone speaks, something is posted, something is said about you. In each case, your mind forms instant conclusions. Do not trust these first conclusions automatically. Examine them. Ask whether they are accurate or simply emotional reactions. This practice alone can transform your entire emotional life because it interrupts the chain from impression to reaction. There is also discipline in speech after insult. Once you have examined the judgment, decide whether response is even necessary. Many times, silence is sufficient because the insult contains no meaningful content. Other times, a calm, factual response is enough. Very rarely does insult require emotional engagement. The more disciplined you become, the fewer responses you will need. A person who reacts instantly to insult is living externally. His inner state depends on the behavior of others. A disciplined person remains internally governed. He hears words but does not immediately surrender his reasoning to them. He allows thought to settle before action. This makes him difficult to disturb because his stability is not placed in fragile opinions. You should also recognize how often insult is amplified by your own interpretation. A neutral statement can become an insult if you decide to interpret it that way. This is why self-examination is essential. Ask whether you are reacting to what was actually said or to what you imagined it meant. Much suffering is created by this gap between reality and interpretation. There will be moments when your pride insists on immediate response. It will tell you that silence means weakness. It will tell you that delay means submission. It will demand expression. In those moments you must remember that obedience to impulse is not strength. It is lack of governance. True strength is the ability to hold back until reason has spoken. As this discipline develops, you will notice a shift in how others affect you. Insults will feel less urgent. Arguments will lose emotional weight. You will begin to see communication more clearly without becoming entangled in every emotional fluctuation. This is not indifference. It is clarity of judgment free from unnecessary disturbance. Evening reflection will reveal your progress. Review every moment you reacted too quickly. Identify where judgment was not examined. Identify where emotion replaced reason. Do not judge yourself harshly. Simply observe patterns so they can be corrected. Growth comes from recognition, not denial. Over time, you will realize that most insults say more about the speaker than about you. People project their own frustration, fear, or ignorance outward. If you take every projection personally, you will never find rest. But if you see it clearly, you remain steady even in disagreement. Do not allow insults to pull you away from your purpose. Every moment spent in reactive defense is a moment removed from meaningful action. You cannot build a disciplined life while constantly responding to disturbance. Energy must be directed toward what is within your control, not toward correcting every external opinion. The final discipline is this. Before any response, ask whether your judgment is governed by reason or by wounded pride. If pride is speaking, remain silent until reason returns. If reason is clear, respond calmly or not at all. This single habit will protect your dignity more than any argument ever could. A stable mind does not require others to speak well of it. It requires only that it acts well according to reason. When you learn to examine judgments before reacting to insult, you reclaim control over your inner world. You stop being a servant to every passing opinion. You become steady in yourself. And in that steadiness there is a form of dignity no insult can touch. Number 5. Discipline desire and free yourself from dependence. You are not suffering because desire exists. You are suffering because desire governs you without examination. That is the hidden disorder behind restlessness, not life itself, not people, not lack of opportunity, but the untrained mind that treats every impulse as a command and every longing as a necessity. The moment desire becomes authority over reason, dependence is already formed, even if you have not yet noticed it. Look at how your day begins. Before you choose your actions, desire already has suggestions. You want comfort before effort. You want recognition before discipline. You want certainty before action. You want emotional relief before truth. And because these desires feel urgent, you follow them without questioning whether they are guiding you toward strength or toward weakness. This is how dependence is built, not in dramatic moments, but in small, unexamined agreements with impulse. You must understand what desire actually is. It is not a command from truth. It is a movement in the mind that arises from impressions. It claims importance because it feels strong, not because it is correct. Hunger, attraction, ambition, fear, and comfort-seeking all appear as demands, but none of them carry moral authority. They only describe what the body or imagination prefers in a given moment. If you treat every preference as necessity, you surrender governance of your life to instability. The undisciplined person believes freedom means satisfying desire quickly, but that is not freedom. That is captivity with constant permission slips. Every time you obey an unchecked desire, you strengthen its authority over you. You teach the mind that urgency is more powerful than reason. Over time, you become reactive instead of deliberate. You no longer choose. You respond, and a life that only responds is a life without direction. Real freedom begins when you can observe desire without obeying it immediately, when you can feel longing without being controlled by it, when you can recognize attraction without being compelled by it, when you can notice fear without surrendering to it. This separation between feeling and action is where discipline is born. Without it, the mind is simply a chain of impulses pretending to be a self. You are not required to eliminate desire. That would be unnatural. You are required to govern it, to place it under examination before action. Ask whether what you want strengthens your character or weakens it. Ask whether it is aligned with reason or merely with comfort. Ask whether it leads to stability or dependence. Most desires fail this test when examined honestly. They promise relief, but produce attachment. They promise pleasure, but create instability. Notice how dependence forms in ordinary life. You depend on approval to feel worthy. You depend on outcomes to feel secure. You depend on certain people to feel complete. You depend on certain comforts to feel calm. Each dependence is built from repeated surrender to desire. Each time you say, "I cannot be okay unless this happens," you weaken your ability to stand independently in yourself. And once dependence is formed, fear follows closely behind it. Fear of losing what you depend on becomes constant background noise in the mind. A disciplined mind breaks this chain by returning authority to reason. Reason does not ask what feels immediately satisfying. It asks what is right within your control. It distinguishes between what can be chosen and what cannot. Your choices, your judgments, your actions belong to you. Outcomes, reactions of others, and external conditions do not. When desire pulls you towards something outside your control, reason reminds you that attachment to it will produce instability. This reminder is the beginning of inner freedom. In the morning, before engaging with the world, you must train yourself to see desire clearly. Sit with your mind before it is disturbed by external impressions. Observe what it immediately reaches for. Comfort, validation, ease, distraction, control over uncertain outcomes. Do not obey these impulses. Do not suppress them. Simply identify them as movements, not commands. Then decide consciously what actions are actually required by your role as a rational being. This practice may feel uncomfortable at first because desire is accustomed to obedience. It resists being questioned. It creates emotional noise when ignored. But this discomfort is not harm. It is withdrawal from dependency. Every moment you resist automatic obedience, you weaken the grip of impulse and strengthen the authority of reason. You will notice that many desires are not even truly yours. They are inherited from environment, comparison, and habit. You see others pursuing something and assume it must be valuable. You see approval given elsewhere and assume it must be necessary for you. You see comfort in others and assume you are missing something. But none of these observations carry truth on their own. They are impressions, not judgments. If you do not examine them, you live according to imitation rather than understanding. The disciplined person asks a different question. Not, "What do I want right now?" but, "What kind of person do I choose to become through this desire?" This question transforms the entire structure of decision-making. It shifts attention from immediate satisfaction to long-term character. It replaces urgency with clarity. It removes emotional pressure from choice and replaces it with reasoned evaluation. There is a deeper form of dependence that must also be addressed: emotional dependence on outcomes. You attach your internal stability to whether things go a certain way. If they go well, you feel elevated. If they fail, you collapse inwardly. This instability comes from giving outcomes authority over your inner state. But outcomes are not moral events. They are external events. They do not define virtue. They do not define character. They simply occur. When you tie your peace to outcomes, you become fragile. Every delay becomes suffering. Every refusal becomes disturbance. Every uncertainty becomes anxiety. But when you separate your inner stability from external results, you regain strength. You act with full effort, but without emotional dependence on the result. This is not indifference, it is clarity. You still care about action. You simply refuse to surrender your mind to what lies beyond your control. Throughout the day, desire will attempt to reclaim authority. It will say you need reassurance. It will say you need distraction. It will say you need immediate reward. In each case, pause and ask whether obedience will strengthen or weaken your self-command. Most impulsive actions lose power when examined in this way. The moment delay is introduced, desire loses its automatic dominance. You must also learn to tolerate not fulfilling certain desires. This is essential training. If every desire is satisfied immediately, discipline never forms. Strength emerges when you can feel lack without rushing to fill it, when you can experience discomfort without escaping it, when you can sit with uncertainty without demanding resolution. Each moment of restraint builds independence from impulse. Evening reflection is where you evaluate this training honestly. Ask where desire controlled your actions. Ask where you acted without examination. Ask where you confused urgency with necessity. Do not judge yourself with anger. Simply observe patterns. Awareness is the beginning of correction. Without awareness, change cannot occur. With awareness, repetition can be interrupted. You will begin to notice a subtle shift as discipline grows. Desires still appear, but they no longer feel like commands. They become suggestions that must pass through reason before action. Emotional intensity loses its authority. Decision-making becomes quieter, more stable, less reactive. This is the return of inner governance. Freedom is not the absence of desire. Freedom is the ability to choose whether desire governs you. A person ruled by desire is constantly negotiating with himself. A person governed by reason is no longer in internal conflict. He sees desire clearly, evaluates it, and acts only when it aligns with principle. This removes the constant tension that comes from chasing satisfaction in every direction. Dependence weakens your perception of reality. It makes you exaggerate importance where none exists. It makes you believe certain outcomes are essential when they are only preferences. It makes you feel incomplete when nothing is actually missing except disciplined judgment. When dependence is removed, reality becomes simpler. You see events without distortion. You respond without compulsion. You must begin treating desire as material for examination, not instruction for action. Every impulse must pass through a filter of reason before it is accepted. If it fails that examination, it is not rejected with emotion, but set aside calmly. This repeated process gradually rebuilds the mind into something stable. Over time, you will notice something unexpected. Life becomes less urgent but more meaningful. Because you are no longer driven by constant craving, attention becomes clearer, actions become more intentional. Relationships become less dependent and more honest. You no longer approach life as something that must satisfy you at every moment. You approach it as something to be governed with clarity. When desire no longer controls you, dependence loses its foundation. When dependence is gone, fear loses its grip. When fear weakens, reason can finally guide your actions without interference. This is the path toward inner stability that cannot be taken from you by circumstance or opinion. Return each day to this discipline. Observe desire. Examine it. Separate it from necessity. Act only when reason approves. In doing so, you are not suppressing life. You are governing it. And a governed life is no longer scattered by impulse or dependent on external approval. It becomes steady, deliberate, and free in the only way that truly matters. Number 6. Withhold explanation from those committed to misunderstanding. You are not required to explain yourself to every mind that refuses to understand. That belief alone is enough to remove a great deal of suffering from your life. Most of your exhaustion does not come from living honestly. It comes from trying to make every dishonest or closed mind accept your honesty. You keep entering conversations not to express truth, but to force agreement, and when agreement does not come, you begin over-explaining as if repetition could replace understanding. This is where your peace disappears. Look closely at what happens inside you when someone misunderstands you. The mind immediately assumes responsibility for correcting their perception. You begin constructing arguments, you search for better phrasing, you replay what you said and imagine how it could be improved. You treat misunderstanding as if it is a problem you must solve. But not every misunderstanding is solvable. Some minds are not seeking clarity. They are seeking confirmation of their own interpretation. And when a mind is committed to its own interpretation, explanation becomes ineffective regardless of how carefully it is delivered. You must separate two things clearly in your judgment. One is a genuine misunderstanding where reason can correct error. The other is a refusal to understand where the person is not engaging in truth-seeking at all. The first deserves calm clarification. The second does not deserve emotional labor. If you treat both as equal, you waste your inner energy trying to reach minds that are not open to reason. This is not wisdom. This is self-exhaustion disguised as communication. Your suffering increases when you believe your worth depends on being correctly understood by everyone. This belief creates constant vulnerability. Every misinterpretation feels like a threat to identity. Every distorted opinion feels like an injustice that must be corrected. You begin living in reaction to other people's perceptions instead of remaining grounded in your own rational conduct. But your character does not depend on their interpretation. It depends on your actions guided by reason and virtue. There is a deeper discipline required here. You must learn to distinguish between speaking to clarify truth and speaking to control perception. Clarification serves reason, control serves ego. When you are driven by ego, explanation becomes endless because no amount of words can guarantee how you are received. When you are guided by reason, explanation is limited because you understand that truth does not require infinite defense. It either stands clearly or it does not reach the listener. Many people waste their lives trying to repair every misunderstanding as if their dignity is under constant negotiation. They believe silence after being misjudged means surrender, but silence is not surrender when the effort to explain has already become irrational. Silence in such moments is self-governance. It is the recognition that your peace cannot depend on changing every mind that crosses your path. When you repeatedly explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding, you begin to lose your inner center. You start measuring your clarity by how others respond. You begin shaping your words to prevent distortion instead of speaking truth plainly. Over time, your speech becomes less honest and more strategic. You stop expressing what is right and start calculating how to be received. This is a quiet corruption of character that happens without notice. The disciplined mind refuses this corruption. It speaks truth simply when truth is required, and then it stops. It does not continue speaking to repair every distortion. It does not chase after acceptance through repetition. It recognizes that responsibility ends at rational expression, not at emotional approval. Once you have spoken clearly with integrity, what others do with that information belongs to them, not to you. Begin to observe how often your explanations are not actually necessary. Many situations do not require defense but acceptance. Someone forms an opinion, someone draws a conclusion, someone misunderstands your intention. Your impulse is to correct immediately. But ask yourself whether correction is truly required or whether it is simply discomfort with being misread. Most of the time it is the latter. You are not defending truth, you are defending image. This is where Stoic discipline demands restraint. You must train yourself to tolerate being misunderstood without immediate correction. This does not mean allowing falsehood to guide your actions. It means refusing to surrender your composure to other people's interpretations. If your conduct is just and your intention is rational, then misunderstanding does not damage your moral position. It only reveals the limits of another person's perception. Each morning you should prepare your mind for this reality. Do not assume that clarity will always be received clearly. Do not assume that your intentions will always be understood accurately. Do not assume that your words will always land as you intended. Instead, accept in advance that human perception is unstable. This preparation removes the emotional shock that usually leads to over-explanation. When you are no longer surprised by misunderstanding, you are less likely to react to it. When you encounter misunderstanding during the day, pause before responding. Do not rush into correction. Observe whether explanation is truly needed or whether it is simply your pride reacting. Ask whether the situation can be left without further engagement. In many cases, time itself corrects what immediate explanation cannot. A calm mind understands that not every distortion requires instant repair. You must also examine why the need to explain feels so urgent. Often it comes from attachment to reputation. You want to be seen as correct, reasonable, or good in the eyes of others, but reputation is not fully under your control. It shifts based on perception, bias, and incomplete information. If you attach your peace to reputation, you will constantly feel compelled to manage how you are perceived. This creates a life of endless adjustment and emotional dependence on external judgment. The Stoic approach removes this dependence. It shifts focus from perception to conduct. Ask not whether others fully understand you, but whether your actions were aligned with reason. If they were, then misunderstanding cannot harm your inner integrity. If they were not, then correction should be directed toward your behavior, not toward forcing others to revise their interpretation of it. There is also a practical discipline in speech that must be learned. Speak once with clarity, not repeatedly with anxiety. When your message has been expressed truthfully and calmly, resist the urge to re-enter the same explanation from different angles. Repetition often weakens rather than strengthens meaning. It signals uncertainty rather than clarity. A stable mind does not need constant verbal reinforcement of its position. You will notice that those committed to misunderstanding often do not change regardless of explanation. This is not because your words lack value, but because their judgment is already fixed. When this is the case, further explanation is not communication. It is participation in a closed loop that drains your attention and disturbs your composure. The wise response is not more words, but withdrawal of unnecessary engagement. There is strength in refusing to argue with every misinterpretation. This refusal is not arrogance, it is preservation of mental order. You are not obligated to enter every mental space where your actions are distorted. Your responsibility ends where reason has already been applied clearly and honestly. Beyond that point, continuing to explain becomes an attempt to control outcomes that are not yours. You should also learn to distinguish between those who seek truth and those who seek confirmation. A person seeking truth may question you but remains open to correction. A person seeking confirmation resists clarity regardless of evidence. The first deserves patient explanation. The second does not benefit from extended engagement. Recognizing this difference prevents unnecessary emotional expenditure. As you practice this discipline, you will feel initial discomfort. The mind will interpret silence as loss of control. It will suggest that you are being misrepresented. It will demand further justification. But if you observe this carefully, you will see that it is not reason speaking. It is insecurity reacting. You must allow this discomfort to pass without obeying it. Over time, something important will shift. Your words will become more deliberate. Your attention will become more stable. Your need for external validation will weaken. You will stop entering conversations to secure approval and start speaking only when truth requires expression. This simplicity restores clarity to communication and removes unnecessary tension from social interaction. Evening reflection will reveal how often you engaged in unnecessary explanation. You will notice patterns of over-defending, over-clarifying, and over-investing in how you are perceived. Do not judge yourself harshly for this. Simply recognize it as training in progress. Awareness is the beginning of correction. The deeper lesson here is that truth does not require constant reinforcement through persuasion. It requires only clear expression and disciplined conduct. After that, it stands, or it does not, independent of how others choose to interpret it. When you accept this fully, you stop exhausting yourself trying to manage every misunderstanding. You regain something more valuable than approval. You regain mental independence. You are no longer controlled by the need to be perfectly understood. You are no longer pulled into endless justification. You are no longer reacting to every distorted perception. You remain centered in reason, continuing your life without unnecessary disturbance. This is where dignity is protected, not through constant explanation, but through disciplined restraint. Not through controlling perception, but through governing your own response. When you learn to withhold explanation from those committed to misunderstanding, you are not withdrawing from truth. You are aligning with it. Number 7. Choose virtue over attention and applause each day. You keep trading your inner stability for external applause without even noticing it. That is the hidden transaction behind so much of your stress. You act in ways designed to be seen, approved, and validated, then wonder why your peace disappears the moment attention shifts elsewhere. You are not living according to virtue. You are living according to audience response, and a life governed by audience response is never steady, because audiences are never steady. Look closely at how often your choices are shaped by imagined observers. Before you speak, you consider how it will sound. Before you act, you consider how it will appear. Before you commit to effort, you consider whether anyone will notice. Even your restraint is sometimes performed for approval. This is how attention becomes a silent ruler. It does not command you openly. It guides you through anticipation of reward. Virtue does not operate this way. Virtue is not concerned with being seen. It is concerned with being correct in action according to reason. It does not ask who is watching. It asks whether the action is just, disciplined, and aligned with rational conduct. When you replace this internal standard with external applause, you weaken the foundation of character. You begin to measure worth by visibility instead of integrity. You suffer because applause is unstable. It rises and falls based on mood, fashion, and perception. One day you are noticed, another day you are ignored. One moment you are praised, the next you are forgotten. If your emotional balance depends on this cycle, you will never find rest. You will always be adjusting yourself to the shifting attention of others, trying to remain relevant instead of remaining rational. This is where most people lose themselves. They begin to treat visibility as value. They assume that being noticed means being meaningful. But attention is not proof of virtue. It is only proof of perception, and perception is often distorted, incomplete, and temporary. If you build your self-respect on attention, you are building it on unstable ground. You must return your focus to what is actually within your control. Your judgments belong to you, your intentions belong to you, your actions belong to you. Whether those actions are witnessed or praised does not belong to you. When you confuse these domains, you begin to chase recognition instead of correctness. You become reactive to approval instead of committed to principle. The disciplined mind begins each day by asking a different question than the crowd. Not, how will I be seen today, but how will I act according to reason today? This shift seems small, but it changes everything. It removes performance from decision-making. It removes anxiety about perception. It restores clarity of purpose. When your standard is internal, you no longer need to adjust yourself to every shifting opinion around you. Attention often corrupts action in subtle ways. You start doing things not because they are right, but because they are visible. You choose efforts that can be displayed and avoid efforts that are necessary but unseen. You begin to value recognition more than correctness. Over time, your character becomes shaped by visibility rather than integrity. This is how internal disorder grows while external appearance remains intact. Virtue requires a different discipline. It requires willingness to act even when no one is watching and no reward is guaranteed. It requires consistency in private behavior that matches public behavior. It requires honesty when dishonesty would go unnoticed. It requires restraint when indulgence would remain hidden. These are the places where character is actually formed, not in moments of applause, but in moments of invisibility. You must examine how much of your emotional state depends on being acknowledged. Notice how quickly your motivation drops when no one notices your effort. Notice how easily discouragement enters when recognition is delayed. This reveals that your motivation is not rooted in principle but in reward, and anything rooted in reward collapses when reward is removed. A person governed by virtue does not require constant validation to continue acting correctly. He understands that the value of an action is not determined by its audience but by its alignment with reason. He does not abandon discipline when recognition is absent because his standard does not depend on recognition. This creates stability that attention can never provide. Begin training yourself to act without external reinforcement. Do tasks that are necessary but unseen. Maintain discipline in moments where no one will know whether you succeeded or failed. Choose honesty in situations where dishonesty would bring advantage without consequence. These private choices shape the actual strength of character far more than public recognition ever could. You will notice resistance when you attempt this. The mind will ask why effort should be given if no one acknowledges it. This question reveals dependence on external reward. You must answer it with reason. Effort is not justified by recognition, it is justified by correctness of action. A rational being does what is right because it is right, not because it is observed. Attention also distorts perception of success. You begin to believe that being seen as successful is more important than being disciplined. You may even sacrifice inner integrity to maintain external image. This creates a split between appearance and reality. The more you invest in appearance, the more fragile your inner foundation becomes because you are constantly protecting an image instead of strengthening character. You should also examine how often you perform emotional states for others, expressing confidence to be admired, displaying sadness to gain sympathy, showing enthusiasm to be liked. Even silence can become performance when it is used to control perception. Every time emotion is shaped for audience response, you move further away from genuine self-governance. The Stoic path removes this dependency by returning focus to internal judgment. Before acting, ask whether the action is aligned with virtue or aimed at attention. Before speaking, ask whether words serve truth or serve impression. Before choosing direction, ask whether the decision strengthens character or strengthens visibility. These questions gradually rewire decision-making away from external validation. Morning discipline is essential for this transformation. At the start of the day, remind yourself that attention will fluctuate and is not under your control. Some efforts will be noticed. Others will remain invisible. Some actions will be praised. Others will be ignored. None of this determines the quality of your character. What determines it is whether you acted according to reason regardless of outcome. As the day unfolds, observe moments where the desire for attention influences behavior. You may find yourself speaking more than necessary, exaggerating effort, or subtly steering situations toward recognition. When you notice this, pause and correct it internally. Do not seek to eliminate action. Eliminate the need for recognition attached to it. Evening reflection will reveal how often attention shaped your choices. Do not respond with guilt. Respond with clarity. Recognize where virtue was compromised by the desire to be seen. Recognize where effort was influenced by external approval. Then commit to reducing these patterns gradually. Awareness without correction is incomplete. Correction without awareness is impossible. There is a deeper stability that emerges when attention is no longer the center of motivation. You begin to feel less fragmented. Your decisions become simpler. Your emotional state becomes less dependent on external reaction. You stop measuring your day by how much recognition you received and start measuring it by how consistently you acted according to principle. This does not make you indifferent to others. It makes you independent from their approval. You can still engage, contribute, and communicate, but you are no longer governed by whether those actions are applauded. You are guided by whether they are correct within your rational capacity. This distinction protects inner freedom. You must also understand that applause often arrives without wisdom. Many praised actions are not virtuous. Many unnoticed actions are deeply virtuous. If you rely on applause as your guide, you will often be misled. If you rely on virtue, you will remain steady even when recognition is absent or reversed. Over time, you will notice a shift in identity. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who needs to be seen and start thinking of yourself as someone responsible for acting correctly. This shift removes pressure from social interaction. You are no longer performing. You are simply acting according to reason in whatever situation arises. The mind becomes lighter when it is no longer calculating how to be perceived. It becomes more focused, more stable, more present. Energy that was previously spent on managing impression becomes available for meaningful action. This is not withdrawal from life. It is participation in life without dependence on validation. Virtue remains constant regardless of audience. Attention does not. When you choose virtue over attention each day, you align yourself with something stable instead of something shifting. You build identity on conduct rather than perception. You anchor your worth in reasoned action rather than external applause. This is how inner freedom is formed. Not by escaping the world, but by refusing to let the world determine your inner state. Not by avoiding attention, but by no longer needing it to validate your actions. When this discipline becomes consistent, you stop living for recognition and start living for correctness. And in that shift, the mind becomes steady in a way applause can never provide. Number 8. End complaint and meet hardship with calm reason. Complaint is the first sign that you have already surrendered your reasoning to circumstance. It does not change what is happening. It only reveals that your judgment has been handed over to frustration. The event remains what it is. Your reaction is what creates suffering. And complaint is nothing more than reaction without discipline. Look closely at yourself in difficult moments. Something goes wrong. A delay appears. A person behaves unfairly. A plan fails. Immediately the mind begins to speak internally in a tone of resistance. This should not be happening. This is unfair. Why is this happening to me? These thoughts feel automatic, but they are not truth. They are unexamined judgments, and unexamined judgments are the root of complaint. You must understand that hardship itself is not the source of disturbance. The disturbance comes from your interpretation of hardship. Two people can face the same event and respond differently. One complains and becomes agitated. The other observes and responds with clarity. The difference is not in the event. The difference is in the discipline of judgment. This is where your responsibility begins. When you complain, you are attempting to reshape reality through resistance. But reality does not bend to emotional protest. It continues according to its own order. Complaint does not remove difficulty. It only multiplies internal disorder. It adds emotional noise to an already difficult situation. This is why complaint is not harmless expression. It is mental fragmentation. You must begin by recognizing how often complaint arises before reason has been consulted. The mind reacts first and thinks later. This reversal creates suffering. A disciplined mind reverses this pattern. It pauses before forming judgment. It examines what is happening without immediate interpretation. It asks what is within control and what is not. Then it responds based on reason rather than impulse. Hardship becomes lighter when it is stripped of emotional exaggeration. Many difficulties feel heavier only because complaint adds narrative to them. You tell yourself that the situation should not be this way. You compare it to how you wanted it to be. You imagine fairness where none is guaranteed. But life is not structured around personal expectation. It is structured around events that unfold independently of preference. When you accept this, resistance weakens. There is a discipline required in the first moment of difficulty. That moment determines everything that follows. Before complaint forms, you must insert awareness. Notice the impulse to resist. Do not obey it. Do not suppress it. Observe it as a movement of thought. Then ask whether it reflects reality or only preference. This pause is where control is reclaimed. You will notice that complaint often hides avoidance. When something is difficult, the mind complains instead of acting. Complaint creates the illusion of engagement without requiring responsibility. It feels like expression, but it is actually escape. It delays action by occupying attention with dissatisfaction. This is why people who complain often remain stuck. Their energy is consumed by reaction instead of directed towards solution. A disciplined mind refuses this diversion. It does not waste energy describing how things should be different. It asks what can be done within present conditions. If nothing can be done, it accepts the situation without internal resistance. If something can be done, it acts without emotional disturbance. In both cases, complaint becomes unnecessary because judgment is clear. Each morning, you should prepare for this discipline by reminding yourself that difficulties are not interruptions to life. They are part of it. The expectation of a smooth path is what creates unnecessary suffering. When you assume ease as the default condition, every obstacle feels like injustice. But when you understand that obstacles are part of the natural structure of experience, you stop reacting as if something has gone wrong every time difficulty appears. During the day, hardship will present itself in many forms. Delays, misunderstandings, fatigue, frustration, and unexpected demands will arise. Your task is not to prevent these events. Your task is to govern your response. The quality of your life is determined not by the absence of difficulty, but by the discipline of your interpretation of difficulty. When complaint begins internally, interrupt it with examination. Ask what exactly is being judged as wrong. Is it the event itself, or your expectation about the event? Most complaints dissolve when examined closely because they depend on the assumption that reality should align with preference. But preference is not authority over existence. It is only personal inclination. You must also recognize how complaint weakens action. A complaining mind is divided. Part of it resists the situation, while another part tries to function within it. This division reduces effectiveness. Energy that should be directed towards solution is consumed by dissatisfaction. Calm reason eliminates this division by accepting what is present and focusing only on what can be influenced. There is also a deeper injury caused by complaint. It trains the mind to interpret life as unjust whenever it does not match expectation. Over time, this creates a habit of resistance. Even small inconveniences begin to feel like personal offenses. This habit destroys resilience because it makes peace conditional on circumstances. A disciplined mind breaks this conditioning by refusing to assign moral weight to every inconvenience. Hardship must be met with clarity rather than emotional distortion. Calm reason does not deny difficulty. It does not pretend everything is easy. It simply refuses to add unnecessary suffering to what already exists. It treats events as material for response rather than material for emotional protest. This distinction preserves energy and stability. When facing hardship, ask what is actually within your control at this moment. Your judgment, your action, your response, your discipline. These remain available even in difficulty. Everything else is external. Complaint focuses on what is external. Reason focuses on what is available. This shift determines whether hardship becomes a source of collapse or a source of training. You will find that many situations improve simply because you stop feeding them emotional resistance. Calm attention often leads to clearer action. Complaint, by contrast, clouds perception and delays response. The more you complain, the less you see clearly. The less you see clearly, the less effectively you act. You must also train yourself to endure discomfort without immediate verbal reaction. Not every difficulty requires expression. Not every frustration requires articulation. Sometimes silence combined with correct action is more powerful than any complaint. Silence preserves clarity while complaint disperses it. Evening reflection should include an honest review of how often complaint entered your thinking. Not only spoken complaint, but internal complaint. Notice where resistance arose unnecessarily. Notice where judgment was distorted by expectation. This awareness is not for self-criticism but for correction. The goal is not to punish thought but to refine it. Over time, you will notice that hardship loses its emotional sharpness. Events still occur, but they no longer destabilize your mind as easily. This is not because life becomes easier, but because interpretation becomes disciplined. You begin to see difficulty as something to be managed, rather than something to be resisted. A mind free from complaint is not passive, it is steady. It does not waste energy arguing with reality. It directs energy toward response. This creates efficiency in thought and action. It also creates inner stability because peace is no longer dependent on external conditions being favorable. You must remember that complaint is ultimately a judgment that reality should obey preference, but reality does not operate under that rule. When you release this expectation, you stop fighting what cannot be controlled. You begin working only with what is available. This is where rational strength appears. There will be moments when complaint feels justified, when pain is strong, when circumstances are unfair, when outcomes are disappointing. In those moments, you must be especially careful. Justified complaint is still complaint. It still weakens clarity. Instead of validating resistance, return to examination. What is actually within your control in this moment? That question is always available. The disciplined person does not deny hardship. He does not exaggerate it either. He sees it as it is. He responds as reason requires. He does not add emotional narrative that distorts perception. This clarity allows him to remain stable even under pressure. As this practice deepens, you will notice that your mind becomes less reactive. You will no longer feel the constant need to verbalize dissatisfaction. You will move through difficulty with quieter focus. You will act more directly without being slowed by internal protest. This is the beginning of mental strength. A life governed by complaint is a life constantly in conflict with itself. A life governed by reason is a life aligned with reality. The difference between the two is not external conditions but internal discipline. When you end complaint and meet hardship with calm reason, you stop wasting life resisting what is already present. You begin using every moment, even difficult ones, as opportunities to strengthen judgment and refine character. Number 9. Hold your peace and let actions prove character. The need to be understood is one of the fastest ways to lose control of yourself. You begin explaining who you are, what you meant, what you intended, as if your value depends on how accurately others interpret you. In doing so, you quietly surrender your authority over your own character. You start living as if your identity must be confirmed externally before it can be trusted internally. This is where instability begins. You must recognize a hard truth. Words are never enough to prove character. Anyone can speak with confidence. Anyone can construct explanations. Anyone can defend themselves with arguments. But none of this reveals who a person actually is when pressure arrives, when temptation appears, or when silence removes all audience. Character is not declared. It is revealed through consistent action under conditions where no recognition is guaranteed. Yet your mind often insists on explanation. It wants to clarify intentions. It wants to correct misunderstandings. It wants to control perception through language. This impulse feels like responsibility, but it is often insecurity disguised as communication. The more you rely on explanation, the less you rely on conduct. And the less you rely on conduct, the more fragile your sense of self becomes. You must begin separating what is essential from what is unnecessary. It is not necessary to convince every mind of your sincerity. It is not necessary to repair every distorted opinion. It is not necessary to respond to every misjudgment. These are not duties of reason. They are habits of ego that mistake attention for validation. Reason asks a simpler question: what action is required here, and what action is merely reactive noise? Holding your peace is not avoidance, it is discipline. It is the refusal to let emotional urgency dictate speech. It is the decision to remain internally steady while external interpretations shift. When you hold your peace, you are not withdrawing from truth. You are refusing to dilute truth with unnecessary defense. You allow your conduct to remain the primary expression of your principles. Look at how often you weaken yourself through unnecessary explanation. You say something once and then feel compelled to repeat it in different forms. You justify your actions to people who have already formed conclusions. You argue with interpretations that were never based on reason in the first place. Each time you do this, you give away a portion of your inner stability, not because you are wrong, but because you are trying to make what is already clear become universally accepted. But universal acceptance is not within your control. You can only govern your own judgment and action. When you attempt to govern how others interpret you, you move beyond your proper domain. This creates frustration because you are trying to control what does not belong to you. The result is unnecessary disturbance of mind. A disciplined person understands that silence is sometimes the most accurate response, not silence born from fear, but silence born from clarity. When speech adds nothing to virtue, it is excess. When explanation serves only to soothe insecurity, it is distortion. When words are used to repair reputation instead of expressing truth, they lose integrity. In such moments, restraint is stronger than argument. You should examine your daily behavior honestly. How often do you speak to be understood rather than to be truthful? How often do you explain yourself to avoid discomfort rather than to communicate necessity? How often do you continue conversations not because they are meaningful, but because unresolved perception feels intolerable? These patterns reveal dependence on external validation disguised as communication. Morning discipline should begin with a simple commitment. You will act according to reason without requiring immediate recognition. You will speak when necessary, not when emotionally pressured. You will allow misunderstanding to exist without immediate correction if correction does not serve virtue. This preparation removes urgency from social interaction before the day begins. Throughout the day, you will encounter moments where silence feels uncomfortable. Someone may misinterpret your intention. Someone may underestimate your effort. Someone may question your decision. In those moments, the impulse to explain will arise quickly. But pause before responding. Ask whether your words will improve understanding or simply relieve emotional tension. Most of the time, the impulse is not about clarity. It is about discomfort with being misperceived. This discomfort is not a signal that you must speak. It is a signal that your dependence on external perception is still active. The task is not to obey it, but to observe it. When you observe it without reaction, it begins to lose authority. You realize that being misunderstood does not actually harm your character. It only disturbs your preference for being seen correctly. Let your actions become the stable reference point of your identity. Actions do not require interpretation. They exist plainly in time. They show consistency or inconsistency. They reveal discipline or lack of discipline. Unlike words, they do not depend on persuasion. Over time, actions form a clearer account of who you are than any explanation ever could. When you rely too heavily on explanation, you create a gap between who you are and what you say about yourself. This gap becomes exhausting to maintain. You must constantly reinforce your image through words because your actions are no longer the primary source of identity. But when actions align with reason, explanation becomes secondary. You no longer need to defend yourself constantly because your conduct already speaks with consistency. You must also understand that some minds are not receptive to clarity regardless of how carefully it is presented. This is not your responsibility to fix. Your responsibility is to act correctly, not to ensure universal comprehension. When you attempt to force understanding where it is not available, you drain energy that should be directed toward living well. Evening reflection is necessary here. Examine where you spoke unnecessarily. Identify where explanation was driven by insecurity rather than necessity. Notice where silence would have preserved more dignity. This reflection is not for regret, it is for refinement. Awareness transforms unconscious habit into conscious discipline. Over time, you will notice a shift. Your speech becomes more precise. Your need to justify yourself decreases. Your attention moves away from managing perception and returns to managing conduct. You begin to feel less scattered because you are no longer dividing energy between action and explanation. You act and you let action stand. Holding your peace also protects you from emotional escalation. Many conflicts grow because people feel compelled to defend every misunderstanding immediately, but not every misunderstanding requires engagement. Some resolve naturally with time. Others dissolve when actions contradict false assumptions. Immediate response often intensifies conflict rather than resolving it. Silence, when chosen correctly, allows reality to clarify itself without interference. There is also dignity in allowing your life to unfold without constant verbal commentary. A person who speaks less about himself and allows behavior to speak instead develops a kind of stability that cannot be easily disturbed. He is not constantly negotiating how he is perceived. He is simply living according to principle and letting results appear naturally. This discipline does not make you passive, it makes you deliberate. When speech is necessary, it is clear and grounded in reason. When silence is appropriate, it is steady and without tension. There is no compulsion to fill space with justification. There is no fear of being misunderstood. There is only attention to whether action aligns with virtue. You will also notice that people begin to respond differently when you stop over-explaining. Your words gain weight because they are no longer diluted by repetition. Your presence becomes more stable because it is no longer dependent on constant verbal reinforcement. You become less predictable in a positive sense, because you are no longer reacting to every perception of you. The deeper lesson is that character does not require constant verbal defense. It requires consistency in action over time. If your conduct is aligned with reason, it will eventually be evident without excessive explanation. If it is not aligned, no amount of explanation will correct it. This realization removes the illusion that words are the primary tool of self-definition. When you hold your peace, you are not hiding. You are trusting that truth expressed through action is more reliable than truth defended through anxiety. You are choosing stability over reaction. You are choosing discipline over emotional urgency. You are choosing clarity over unnecessary defense. In time, you will understand that the strongest position is not the one that speaks the most, but the one that remains steady regardless of how it is interpreted. A mind trained in this discipline no longer feels the need to correct every perception. It simply continues acting according to reason, allowing life itself to reveal character without interference. Number 10. Live as if time is short and sacred. You are not running out of time in a dramatic sense. You are wasting it in quiet ways every single day through unconscious living. Time is not taken from you in one sudden moment. It is given away in small permissions, each delay in discipline, each unnecessary reaction, each indulgence in distraction, each moment you postpone what reason already knows you should do. This is how life is reduced without notice. When you treat time as unlimited, you treat your actions as optional. You begin to assume there will always be another moment to correct yourself, another opportunity to act properly, another day to become serious about your life. This assumption weakens urgency. It creates a false sense of continuation that removes weight from the present moment. And without weight, your choices become careless. But when you recognize that time is not only limited but also sacred, something in your mind becomes sharper. Sacred does not mean emotional sentiment. It means irreversibility. Once a moment passes, it does not return. Once an action is neglected, it cannot be reclaimed. Once a day is spent in disorder, it cannot be reconstructed. This recognition forces attention into the present instead of scattering it across imagined futures. Most suffering does not come from time itself. It comes from ignoring it. You act as if you have more of it than you actually do, and then you are surprised when life feels unfinished. But life is not unfinished because it is incomplete. It feels unfinished because you have not treated it with seriousness while it was available to you. You must examine how often you delay necessary action under the assumption that future motivation will be stronger than present discipline. You tell yourself you will act tomorrow with more clarity. You tell yourself you will change when conditions are better. You tell yourself you will begin when you feel ready. But readiness is not a feeling that arrives before action. It is a result of action itself. A disciplined mind does not wait for ideal conditions to begin living correctly. It recognizes that time is already moving regardless of readiness. Each moment not used in accordance with reason becomes a loss of opportunity, not because opportunity disappears externally, but because it is not acted upon internally. You must also see how complaint consumes time without producing anything meaningful. When you complain, you spend the present moment resisting what is already real instead of responding to it. That resistance does not change the situation. It only removes your ability to act effectively within it. Time is spent, but nothing is gained. This is one of the most subtle forms of waste. Similarly, unnecessary explanation drains time that could be used for action. Emotional reactivity drains time that could be used for clarity. Indecision drains time that could be used for progress. Each of these patterns appears small in isolation, but together they form a consistent erosion of life. Not through dramatic failure, but through repeated neglect of the present. To live as if time is sacred is to treat every moment as a point of responsibility, not pressure, not anxiety, but responsibility. You ask at each moment what action is appropriate now, not what action would be perfect later. You stop deferring life to imagined conditions. You begin working within the only domain that actually exists, which is the present moment of choice. Each morning you should remind yourself that the day is not an abstract space of possibilities. It is a limited sequence of moments that will not return. This is not meant to create fear, but clarity. Fear distorts action. Clarity refines it. When you see time clearly, you stop treating it casually. As the day unfolds, you will encounter many distractions that try to pull your attention away from what matters. Some will be external, others will be internal. Thoughts of delay, thoughts of avoidance, thoughts of comfort. Each one will suggest that now is not the right moment for discipline. But there is no other moment available. Only now exists in which action can be chosen. You must train yourself to recognize the illusion of later. Later is where discipline is postponed without consequence in imagination. But in reality, later is simply a continuation of neglect. Every time you choose later over now, you reduce the number of moments available for meaningful action. Not metaphorically, but actually. A serious mind does not overextend itself across imaginary timelines. It focuses on the present task with full attention. It understands that life is not built in abstract future plans, but in immediate decisions. When attention is fully grounded in the present, action becomes cleaner and more effective. When attention is scattered across time, action becomes fragmented and weak. You should also examine how often you treat your own growth as something that can be postponed without cost. You delay discipline, assuming identity will remain unaffected. But identity is formed through repetition of present choices. Each moment is either strengthening or weakening your capacity for reasoned action. There is no neutral accumulation. Evening reflection should include a clear review of how you used time, not in terms of productivity alone, but in terms of alignment with reason. Where did you act with clarity? Where did you delay without necessity? Where did you lose time to emotional reaction instead of deliberate conduct? This review is not to create guilt, but to sharpen awareness of how time is actually being lived. You will begin to notice that when time is treated as sacred, unnecessary actions naturally reduce. You speak less without purpose. You engage less with distractions. You hesitate less before doing what is required, not because pressure increases, but because clarity increases. The mind stops inflating the importance of irrelevant actions. Hardship also changes in perception when time is respected. Difficult moments no longer feel like interruptions. They become part of the sequence of time that must be navigated with discipline. Instead of resisting them, you respond within them. This shift reduces internal conflict and increases effectiveness. There is also a deeper consequence of ignoring time. It creates the illusion that self-examination can always be delayed. You avoid confronting your own patterns because you assume there will always be future opportunities for correction. But without present correction, future correction never arrives. The cycle continues until attention is finally forced by circumstance. To live correctly is to break this cycle deliberately, not through dramatic transformation, but through consistent present awareness. Each moment becomes an opportunity to act according to reason rather than preference. Each decision becomes a point of alignment rather than delay. You must also understand that sacredness of time is not about emotional reverence. It is about recognition of finality. A moment once lived cannot be relived. This fact alone should bring seriousness to even small decisions. Not anxiety, but seriousness. A calm recognition that what is done now forms the only material from which your life is built. When you begin to live with this awareness, the mind becomes less scattered. You stop treating days as endless space and begin treating them as limited structure. Within that structure, your actions become more intentional. You no longer drift through time. You move through it with direction. Over time, you will notice that urgency is replaced with clarity. Not frantic urgency, but steady awareness that time is always being used whether you choose consciously or not. This awareness prevents drift. It anchors attention in the present and reduces unnecessary emotional noise. Living as if time is short and sacred does not mean rushing. It means removing waste. It means eliminating actions that do not contribute to reasoned living. It means refusing to postpone what should be done now. It means understanding that every moment is already the complete space of your life in miniature. When this discipline becomes stable, your relationship with time changes completely. You no longer feel that life is something happening elsewhere or later. You recognize it as something occurring continuously in each present moment of choice. And in that recognition, you stop waiting to live and begin actually living with deliberate clarity.